So I'm here at the Lyscombe rewilding site, which is a Dorset Wildlife Trust reserve just north of Dorchester, and I just want to talk briefly about blending traditional, well-established nature conservation habitat management with the more recent rewilding approach. And we've got a perfect example of that here, where you've got basically on the chalk, you've got chalk grassland, really old ancient chalk grassland on steep slopes, site of special scientific interest, and the wider landscape is dominated by species poor grassland and some arable further south, and some lay grassland as well. So what do you do when you've got really important and legally protected lowland calcareous grassland, chalk grassland in this case, which is a site of special scientific interest, and you've also got sites of nature conservation interest, which are slightly lower tier, so not quite as good as the SSSI grasslands. What do you do when you've got those legally designated kind of hot spots of wildlife, particularly invertebrates and wildflowers, embedded within a wider landscape that is going to be subject to rewilding? Those SSSI units are going to be re-fenced. So here you can see we've renewed some of the fencing, created one kind of grazing unit embracing part of the SSSI, and cattle, longhorn cattle, have been put into this part of the SSSI so they can get to work grazing down the biomass. It hasn't been grazed for a few years, so the cattle are now in there, the longhorn cattle, and they are breaking out the biomass. And hopefully this coming summer and the next few years, the SSSI will really return to its kind of full glory. It's pretty good as it was, but it will just be better in terms of condition. This is kind of a refugia for the wider rewilding landscape. And the idea is you've got this kind of ring fencing or internal fencing around the SSSI, and that will be embedded within a much bigger grazing unit. And that bigger grazing unit will be ring fenced, and once that bigger ring fencing is complete around a much bigger part of the site, we can open the gates to this SSSI fencing, and the cattle can then wander a lot more widely across the whole of that larger grazing unit. And this kind of porous fencing that we got just around the SSSI, porous because of the gates, that enables us to kind of shift the cattle back into the SSSI in future if it looks like the SSSI isn't getting quite as much grazing as it needs to get within a wider rewilding landscape. And we're able to ensure that way that the SSSI grassland remains in favourable condition and provides that kind of refugia of wildflowers and invertebrates to then gradually spread out. Some of those wildflowers in particular will be spread by the cattle, because they'll be ranging within and outside of the SSSI calcareous grassland, spreading the seeds. And in the longer term, you can hypothesise that the SSSI will become increasingly unremarkable, not because it deteriorates, but because the surrounding landscape within it, which it's embedded, just gets better and better from a calcareous wildlife point of view. So what you can anticipate here is that over the next 3 decades or so, the wider landscape, the arable and the improved grassland that surrounds the SSSI, will become increasingly species-rich grassland with emerging shrubland, and a lot of the wildflowers of these kind of chalk downland landscapes will spread out quite rapidly, with perhaps a helping hand from people as well, into the wider grazing unit. And so it will its value will be elevated, and it will become similar in value in terms of the wildflowers it supports and some of the invertebrates to the SSSI itself. So in that respect, the SSSI will be unremarkable. But I think this is quite a good example of blending conservation management, so prescriptive management of a SSSI, ancient grassland, chalk grassland, blending that within a wider rewilding landscape. And I think it's entirely appropriate to blend the two approaches. And it does show that the two approaches are complementary. So rewilding isn't a replacement for conservation management with defined goals and end results you're aiming towards. It's entirely compatible with that. It just means you need to kind of manage the situation, have adaptive management, tweak the grazing if we need to within the SSSI. What we'd probably find is that the cattle do range between the SSSI areas and the wider non-SSSI areas, and the SSSI itself gets enough grazing and browsing to keep it in good heart. But if not, we can bring the cattle down into the SSSI, close the gates, and they can graze off the grassland as appropriate, kind of in line with what's needed given its SSSI status and its existing high biodiversity value. So tell me what you think in the comment section. Do you agree that this kind of a blended approach to rewilding is appropriate? Is there an alternative way of doing things here? Yeah, do subscribe to the channel, comment in the comments section. There's some links in the description to this video, and there are other videos, so I'll put a link at the end of this video to another video you'll probably want to watch about rewilding at Lyscombe.